Today's case takes us deep into the heart of Newham, East London, a place known for its vibrant community, but also for the shadow that gang culture has cast over its streets. It's a story that hits home for so many of us, a reminder that in some postcodes, just stepping outside can cost you your life. Here we meet a young NHS worker, just 22 years old, who would lose his life simply for doing something we all do every day, walking down his own street. No beef, no drama, just an ordinary evening that ended in unspeakable violence. A civilian, a brother, a son, minding his own business, lost to a war he had no part in. In the ends, loyalty's rare and betrayal bleeds. Stabbings, shootings, real stories, real pain. This is Ends Unshanked, where the silence breaks. A young man who got caught up in the crossfire of postcode wars, where territory lines are drawn in blood and innocent lives become collateral damage. His name was David Gommo. He wasn't some hardened street soldier. He was a 24-year-old university marketing graduate, a man who had dreams and ambitions like the rest of us, someone who put in the work to make something of himself. A brother who believed in the power of education, who took his degree and used it to uplift his community. He was a key worker for the NHS, one of those essential staff who kept hospitals running when the pandemic hit. Day in and day out, he made sure the NHS staff had the equipment they needed to stay safe and save lives. He wasn't just another number on a spreadsheet. He was a young man making real change in the world, proving that hard work and dedication still matter. And if you ask his mother, who knows him better than anyone else, she'd tell you her son was, in her words, charismatic, intelligent and focused. Words that speak to his spirit, the light he carried even in the darkest times. He had no ties to gangs, no link to the violence that plagued his neighborhood. But that didn't save him from the harsh reality of postcode wars that have no mercy for the innocent. He was just unfortunate enough to live in a town overrun by them, a place where you can be doing everything right and still end up on the wrong side of a knife. A place where mothers live in fear of that knock on the door, where brothers worry if the streets will ever be safe again. This is the story of David Gommo, a story of what happens when a good man gets caught in a war he never signed up for. The London Borough of Newham was created in 1965, a move that brought together a patchwork of diverse communities under one name and one postcode. It includes areas such as Custom House, a place known for its old-school spirit and tight-knit families; Canning Town, where stories of resilience echo through every block; Beckton, with its quiet streets hiding the weight of history; Plaistow, a melting pot of cultures and hard-working people; Stratford, the heartbeat of regeneration and new beginnings; Manor Park, where family life carries on in the shadow of city life; Forest Park, a green haven that still breathes life into the concrete of East London, plus more, each area with its own unique flavor and its own proud history. Although gangs have always existed in these streets, in earlier years gang members would come from all over the borough, with all areas relatively safe for anyone to go to. Back then, disputes and fights did happen, but they were more personal, more about pride and respect than about turf and postcode loyalty. Fights were usually one-on-one, face-to-face, and while they could be messy, they didn't threaten the whole community in the way we see now. It was a different time, when beef stayed between the people involved, and the rest of the borough could still walk the streets without fear of getting caught in the crossfire. Until the 24th of January, 2009, when things would take a tragic turn for the worst. A day that would change everything, and leave a mark on Newham that would never fade. A 15-year-old boy, still just a child, was set upon by 20-30 gang members from the Custom House area, right outside an anti-violence party of all places. The irony of it, a gathering meant to stop the violence, became the backdrop for one of the most savage attacks this borough had ever seen. That young boy was stabbed again and again, his life stolen before it had even really begun. His blood ran on the same streets we all walk, and his death became the fuel for a fire that would burn through every part of Newham. This would create a massive divide in the borough, a line that split communities and turned neighbours into enemies. In the south, Custom House, Beckton, Canning Town, areas that had always stood together, now found themselves pulled apart. In the north, Plaistow, Manor Park, Forest Park, streets that had once been safe now watched over their shoulders, waiting for the next move in a war that no one wanted, but no one could escape. New gangs were formed in the chaos, young men drawn in by promises of protection and respect that were really just illusions of power. New alliances were made, some out of loyalty, some out of fear, and all of them feeding into a cycle of violence that seemed to have no end. And a war began to rage across the borough, turning corners that used to be safe into battlegrounds. The tension was thick enough to taste, and every day felt like it could be the day you became another name on a wall, another candlelit vigil in a cold street. East London would see some of the worst violence ever recorded in the UK, a level of brutality that shocked even those who thought they'd seen it all. In 2018, it was reported that Newham had the lowest life expectancy out of all of London, a statistic that speaks to just how heavy this burden is on the people who call these streets home. On the 26th of April, 2020, in the height of COVID-19, a time when everyone was on edge and worried about staying safe indoors, David stepped out of his home in the Custom House area of Newham around 10:35 p.m. to nip to the local shop, a simple mission we all know too well. As he walked down the street, phone pressed to his ear, he chatted to his girlfriend on the phone, his voice full of life and laughter as he told her he'd be back in just a minute. A few moments after leaving his home, while still in his own ends, a number of males jumped out of a stolen Dodge Caliber, demanding to know where he was from, as if postcode and street name should decide whether you live or die. David barely had time to react, to even register that danger was right in front of him, before the blades came out, and everything turned to chaos. Within seconds, he was caught and viciously assaulted, and stabbed multiple times, each blow a savage reminder of how fragile life can be when knives decide the fate of a young man on an ordinary night. As David's attackers fled the scene, leaving him broken and bleeding in the cold street, he somehow managed to summon the strength to stagger back to his home, every step a battle to stay alive just a little longer. He was shouting to his mum for help, calling out the only word that could bring comfort in that moment, "Mum," and then he collapsed at his front door, the place that was supposed to be his safest space. His injuries were catastrophic, so deep and vicious that no one could believe how he was even still standing by the time police and ambulance arrived. And when they got him to the hospital, there was nothing more they could do. David was pronounced dead a short while later, leaving a silence in his home that would never be filled. A post-mortem revealed David had been stabbed a total of 10 times with at least 2 different knives, a level of violence that spoke to pure rage and mindless aggression. He was stabbed with such ferocity and force that he had wounds as deep as 19 centimeters, cutting through lung and bone like he was nothing more than a target in a war he never asked to fight. Police would begin their investigations that night, determined to find those responsible for stealing a young man's life and leaving his family in pieces. They found a pair of sunglasses at the scene of the attack, a small clue that would become the first thread to pull in this tangled web of violence. They would also retrieve another pair of sunglasses from the back seat of the stolen silver Dodge Caliber, discovered abandoned a short distance away from the crime scene. Evidence left behind by the careless cruelty of men who thought they were untouchable. These would provide crucial DNA evidence and help identify the gang members who brought so much pain to one family and so much fear to an entire community. On the 3rd of May 2020, Mohammed Jallo, 18 from Stratford and a 17-year-old boy from Telford, were charged with the murder of David Gommo, young men who chose violence over mercy, and now faced the weight of that choice. They appeared at Thames Magistrates Court the next day, where they were remanded to prison to await trial at the Old Bailey at a later date, the first step on the long road to justice. On the 16th of May 2020, Vagni Kaliabali, 22 from Cambridge, was charged with murder, another name added to the list of those who thought they could play God on the streets of Newham. On the 18th of May, David Chur, 20 homeless, and drifting through the streets with no stable place to call home, was also charged with the murder of David Gommo, his name added to the growing list of young men who chose the blade over a better life. Both would be remanded to prison to appear at the Old Bailey at a later date, a date that would loom like a shadow over them as they waited for their day in court. All 4 defendants pled not guilty, refusing to own up to the carnage they'd caused, and a trial was set for July 2021, a trial that would drag the truth of that night out into the open for everyone to see. In a trial that was over 6 weeks long, stretching on, as families sat and listened to every gut-wrenching detail, the prosecution told the jury how Vagny Kaliabali, now 23, David Chia, now 19, Mohammed Jallo, now 19, and the now 18-year-old boy, who can be named as Alex Malaku, were all members or associates of a gang that operates in the north of Newham, a gang that moved like shadows and claimed streets they didn't own. That night, they drove to rival territory in the South Newham area, crossing invisible lines that had been drawn in blood, ready and prepared to inflict serious and fatal injury, their minds set on violence before they even left their homes. For this so-called ride out to the op block, they had arranged for a stolen Dodge Caliper to be parked the previous evening in preparation, a vehicle that would become both their weapon and their getaway. They went equipped with knives and a change of clothes, every detail planned out so they could slip back into the night like nothing had happened. They had also turned off their phones to evade police detection, trying to erase any trace of their movements, but no matter how carefully they planned, the truth would catch up with them. They drove around looking for potential targets, hunting through the streets like predators, until they spotted Mr. Gommo at Freemasons Road, E16, a young man who was just minding his own business, talking to his girlfriend on the phone. He was on the phone to his girlfriend when he was approached by 3 of the 4 defendants, and was stabbed 10 times in a frenzied attack, an attack so quick and brutal that there was no chance to fight back, no chance to run. Mr. Gommo died shortly after of catastrophic injuries so severe, they left no doubt about the intent of those who took his life. The court also heard how Chur had created a cartoon storyboard of the murder, before, during and after, a twisted kind of trophy that was retrieved from his bedroom during a search, a chilling detail that showed just how casually they treated the value of a human life. This was presented to the jury along with CCTV and the DNA evidence lifted from the sunglasses, which had Jallo and Malaku's DNA on, evidence that told the story of that night with no need for words. On the 11th of August, 2021, all 4 defendants were found guilty in the murder of David Gommo, the courtroom falling silent as the verdict was read, a small measure of justice for a man who had worked hard for himself and his community. He had absolutely no affiliations with gangs, no ties to the world that took his life. He was just a civilian, a man trying to do right by his family and his future, and had he left his home a few moments later, he would likely still be alive today, still calling his mum, still dreaming of bigger things. On the 17th of September 2021, Mohammed Jallo, who had achieved great GCSEs and called himself a drug dealer, received 27 years in prison, a life wasted on a path that led nowhere but behind bars. Vagny Kaliabali, who had already been deported from the UK, but smuggled himself back in, also received 27 years imprisonment, paying the price for crossing borders and boundaries without a care for the lives he'd destroy. David Chur, who had already been convicted for a stabbing in 2018, received a 26-year sentence, proving that violence was nothing new to him, nothing he was willing to leave behind. And Alex Malaku received a 21-year sentence, the youngest of the 4, but still old enough to know better, old enough to make choices that would cost him his freedom. A total of 101 years between them, a century of time that won't bring back David but stands as a testament to the weight of their choices. That's all for now, people. I hope you enjoyed the case, and I hope it makes you think about the lives cut short and the choices that lead us down the wrong roads. Don't forget, smash the subscribe button for more stories like this. Thank you for watching.